The silent cry. In the cold emptiness of space, a small, helpless planet was slowly being consumed by an unstoppable enemy. For years, this peaceful world had been under siege by the ruthless Vragan Empire, a powerful alien force bent on expansion. The Vragans were feared across the galaxy, known for their advanced technology and savage tactics. No one had been able to stand against them. And now, the last remaining resistance on the planet was crumbling. On the surface of the planet, in a city full of alien species who had once thrived in peace, chaos reigned. Buildings were in ruins, and the air was thick with dust and smoke. The Vragans had taken control of the skies, their massive warships blocking out the sun. The once proud defenders of the planet had been shattered, their forces broken and scattered. Desperation had taken root in every heart. The leaders of the alien species, desperate to survive, huddled together in their hidden command center. The situation was dire. Every defense they had put up had been obliterated by the Vragan war machines. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and with no way of pushing back. The enemy was at their doorstep, and the end seemed inevitable. In this dark hour, one leader stood up, his face grim but determined. Commander Talier, the leader of the planet's last resistance group, stared at the holographic map of the war zone. His people, all of them, were about to be wiped from existence if no help came. But who could they turn to? Who would come to their aid when they had nothing left to offer? "There's only one option left," Talier said softly, turning to the council gathered around him. His voice carried a mix of fear and hope. "We must send the signal. If anyone out there can hear us, they must know. We need help." The room fell silent. The elders exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether it was worth the risk. There had been rumors, whispers in the galaxy about a mysterious force, a group of warriors known as the Deathworlders. Some said they were nothing more than a legend, a myth told by those who survived their brutal campaigns. But others spoke of their terrifying power, of how they had struck fear into the hearts of the greatest galactic armies. Could the Deathworlders be real? Could they hear the cries of a dying world and come to its aid? It was a long shot, but it was their last hope. There were no other options. Talier gave a signal, and the council members reluctantly agreed. A signal was sent out, broadcasted into the void of space, a cry for help, an SOS message. It was a desperate call to anyone who might listen. The message echoed through the vast expanse of space. "We are the last of the Acceleran people. Our world is lost. Our people are dying. We need help now. Please, someone, anyone, hear us." The transmission was weak, crackling in the silence of space. It was a final plea from a doomed civilization, with no guarantee of being heard. As the transmission reached out into the unknown, a strange silence followed. For a long moment, there was no response, no indication that anyone had received the message. Talier stood by the console, watching the blinking lights in silence. The room was tense. Had they made a mistake? Was it too late? And then, without warning, the lights on the console began to flash rapidly, the signal cutting through the silence. A new message appeared, one that made Talier's heart race in disbelief. It wasn't a simple reply. It was a coordinates beacon, followed by a single chilling message: "We are coming." The word sent a chill down his spine. The Deathworlders had heard the call. They were coming. Talier's mind raced as he tried to process what this could mean. Could they really be the ones to save them? Or had they come for something else? One thing was certain: their arrival would change everything. Outside, the Vragan warships continued their relentless attack, unaware of what was coming. The Acceleran people had no idea who these Deathworlders were, but they knew one thing. This was their only chance. The fleet was on its way. And so, with one last, desperate breath, Talier turned to his people, a spark of hope flickering in his eyes. "The Deathworlders are coming," he said softly. "And with them, our fate will be decided." The arrival of the fleet. The message had been sent. The hope of the Xelran people rested on a single unknown force, the Deathworlders. Commander Tellier stared at the blinking lights on the console, his heart pounding in his chest. The silence of space hung heavy in the air as everyone waited, every second feeling like an eternity. Hours had passed since the signal went out, and still there was no word from the Deathworlders. The people of Xelran continued to hide in their underground shelters, awaiting the inevitable. The Vragan warships had taken full control of the skies, their weapons raining destruction on the cities below. Tellier paced back and forth in the command center, unable to focus. His mind kept returning to the message he had received, the promise that the Deathworlders were on their way. Could it really be true? Could a force so powerful be coming to save them? Suddenly, the silence was broken by a sharp, beeping sound. The lights on the console flashed bright, signaling something. Tallier's heart skipped a beat. "It's them," he whispered. The room went still. The entire council of leaders crowded around Tellier, staring at the screen. The message was clear. It was a fleet. Hundreds, maybe thousands, of ships were approaching the planet. "They're here," said one of the council members, his voice trembling. "The Deathworlders are here." Tellier didn't respond. He couldn't. His mind raced as he thought about what would happen next. These Deathworlders were not like anything the galaxy had ever seen. Rumors spoke of their ferocity, their power, and yet there was no telling what their arrival would mean for Xelran. The ships were coming closer, their dark forms visible on the screens now. They'd moved like shadows across the sky, blurring the line between space and time. The air was thick with tension as the first wave of ships descended toward the surface. As the fleet moved closer, it became clear that the Deathworlders were not here to simply observe. Their ships were massive, each one designed for war. Their hulls were dark and angular, unlike any design the Xelrans had ever encountered. These ships didn't belong to the peaceful, diplomatic races of the galaxy. No, these ships were weapons, and their presence filled the people of Xelran with both dread and awe. Tallier's thoughts were interrupted as a message appeared on the command screen. It was short, to the point, and chilling. "Prepare for engagement." The words sent a ripple of fear through the room. Engagement? With who? The Vragans were still circling above, and they had no idea what was about to come. Would the Deathworlders attack them, or would they aid the Xelrans in their desperate fight? As the ships continued to descend, the ground trembled beneath them. The air itself felt thick with power. The Deathworlders' presence was overwhelming. There was a low hum as the first ship touched down in the heart of the capital city. Tellier felt his heart race. He had to make a decision. The people of Xelran had put their faith in these mysterious warriors. Would they truly be the saviors they needed, or was this just the beginning of something far worse? The commander turned to his council, determination in his eyes. "We don't have much time. We must meet them." He was met with a series of nods. Together, they rushed toward the surface, hoping that they would find salvation, or something even darker. As Tellier and his team made their way to the landing zone, the sight that greeted them was beyond anything they had ever imagined. The Deathworlder ships, now fully on the ground, emitted an eerie glow as their engines powered down. The ships were enormous, towering over the city like giants. The alien warriors emerged from their ships, tall, imposing figures dressed in dark, battle-worn armor. Their presence was unlike anything the Xelrans had ever seen. With their weapons at the ready, the Deathworlders moved with military precision. They didn't speak, but their movements were coordinated. Their eyes, shining with a fierce, dangerous intensity, scanned the area as they walked toward the waiting council. Tallier's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped forward, trying to maintain his composure. This was the moment. The fate of his people rested in the hands of these strangers. Would they fight for the Xelrans, or had they come for something else? A figure stepped forward. This Deathworlder was different from the others. He was taller, more heavily armored, with markings that indicated a high rank. His voice was deep and resonant when he spoke. "We have come," he said, his words carrying an air of finality. "Prepare yourselves." Talier's stomach turned. He had no idea what the Deathworlders had planned. But one thing was certain. The battle for Xelren had only just begun. The battle begins. The Deathworlder fleet had arrived, but their true intentions remained shrouded in mystery. As the massive ships landed, their engines powered down with a low hum that echoed across the war-torn city of Xelren. The air grew thick with tension. The people of Xelren had long awaited help, but now that the Deathworlders had come, their questions only multiplied. What did these fearsome warriors want? Could they truly defeat the Vragan invaders? Commander Talier stood at the forefront, his hand gripping the edge of a nearby building as he watched the imposing figures of the Deathworlders emerge from their ships. Each one was taller than any Xelren soldier, dressed in heavy armor, their eyes glowing with a fierce intensity. The sheer presence of these beings sent a wave of dread through Talier's bones, but there was also something else, a faint flicker of hope. But before he could process it, the battle cries of the Vragans echoed across the sky. The enemy fleet, still hovering above Xelren's surface, began to descend once more. Their ships were sleek and deadly, glistening under the burning rays of the distant sun. The Vragans had not been idle. They were preparing for a final assault. Talier could see the destruction they had caused. Entire cities had been flattened, the planet's surface scarred by brutal warfare. The Xelren resistance had fought valiantly, but they were outnumbered, outmatched. Their only hope now was these mysterious Deathworlders. Without warning, the Deathworlders sprang into action. Their movements were precise, coordinated, military drills honed by years of battle. They marched forward, weapons raised high, their boots pounding the earth with every step. "Ready yourselves," shouted Talier, rallying his forces as the Deathworlders prepared to engage the Vragans. The council members, who had gathered near Talier, exchanged anxious glances, uncertain of what was to come. The first Vragan ship fired a volley of plasma blasts, cutting through the air with deadly precision. The Deathworlders didn't flinch. Instead, they moved with terrifying speed, their weapons flashing as they unleashed a torrent of fire in return. The plasma blasts from the Deathworlders' guns were unlike anything the Vragans had ever seen. Massive energy pulses that disintegrated everything in their path. The sound of the first Vragan ship exploding filled the air with a deafening roar. "This is it," muttered Talier to himself, watching in awe as the Deathworlders tore through the Vragan fleet. Their tactics were ruthless, efficient. The Xelrens had seen war before, but this was something different. The Deathworlders were not here to negotiate, not here to wait. They were here to end this once and for all. But the Vragans were not easily defeated. Their fleet quickly retaliated, launching wave after wave of missiles and energy blasts. For a moment, it seemed like the Deathworlders might falter, but they were relentless. Their ships zipped across the battlefield, evading incoming fire with uncanny agility, while their warriors on the ground continued their brutal assault on the Vragan forces. The Xelren soldiers, who had been waiting anxiously in the shadows, now stepped forward to join the fight. Their weapons seemed insignificant next to the advanced technology of the Deathworlders, but there was a fire in their hearts, a deep resolve to protect their homes, their families. They fought alongside the Deathworlders, unsure of what they could contribute, but determined to stand united. Talier watched as the Deathworlders led the charge, their warriors cutting through the Vragan forces like a knife through butter. One Deathworlder, his armor dented and scorched from the barrage of fire, stood tall at the front, raising his massive weapon and slicing through a group of Vragan soldiers. His movements were fluid, almost graceful, as he dispatched the enemies with terrifying efficiency. This is more than just a battle, Talier realized, his eyes widening. This is an execution. The Deathworlders weren't just fighting for Xelren. They were wiping out the Vragan invaders with an unmatched fury, as if they had a personal vendetta. Talier couldn't help but feel both awe and fear in equal measure. The Deathworlders were like nothing he had ever encountered. There was no hesitation in their actions, no mercy in their eyes. They fought as if this was a matter of survival, and they would not stop until their enemies were completely eradicated. Suddenly, a massive explosion shook the ground, sending a wave of debris through the air. A large Vragan ship had been destroyed, its remains falling to the earth in fiery fragments. But there were more. Hundreds of Vragan ships still hovered in the sky, ready for the next round of battle. Tellier turned to the Deathworlder commander, who had been overseeing the battle from the front lines. The commander nodded, a grim expression on his face. "This is far from over," the commander said, his voice low and cold. "We will not stop until the last Vragan is gone." Tellier could feel the weight of his words, the finality in them. The Deathworlders weren't here to negotiate peace. They were here to cleanse the galaxy of the Vragan scourge. And Celerin was only the first step. As the battle raged on, Tellier couldn't help but wonder, would the Deathworlders be enough to save them? Or had they come to change the galaxy forever, in ways that no one could predict? A turning tide. The battlefield had become a scene of chaos. The deafening roar of explosions, the bright flashes of plasma, and the constant thud of gunfire filled the air. Zelrin soldiers fought bravely, but it was clear that the Deathworlders were the true force on the ground, and the Vragans were beginning to feel the heat of their relentless assault. Commander Tellier had never seen anything like it. The Deathworlders moved with terrifying precision, as if they were one entity, operating as though their actions were choreographed by some unseen hand. Each blow, each shot was deliberate, calculated. Their technology was far beyond anything that Celrins could have imagined, but it was their efficiency and power that truly set them apart. The Vragans, once so sure of their victory, began to falter. Their ships, once soaring through the sky with arrogant confidence, were now being shot down with alarming regularity. The ground troops, once invincible, were losing ground to the Deathworlders' vicious advance. Tellier watched as the Deathworlder warriors pressed forward, cutting through the remaining Vragan forces with ease. But even in the face of this overwhelming might, the Vragans fought back, their desperation fueling their attacks. The remaining Vragan ships began to scatter, their coordinated assaults now a disjointed mess of erratic maneuvers. "Commander," a Celerin officer shouted, running up to Tellier. His face was pale, his breath quick from the exertion. "The Vragans, they're retreating." Tellier's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment they had all been waiting for. The Deathworlders had turned the tide of the battle. The invaders were on the run. But even as the Vragans began to withdraw, Tellier knew better than to relax. The Vragans had shown their ruthless tenacity in the past, and it was unlikely they would give up without a fight. There was something in their retreat that felt wrong, almost calculated, as though they were pulling back to regroup, to strike once more with greater force. "Don't let your guard down," Tellier warned, his voice firm. "The Vragans are not defeated yet." As the Celerin soldiers and Deathworlders pressed on, pushing deeper into the battlefield, the commander's suspicions grew. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The Vragans, although retreating, had something up their sleeves, something Tellier could not yet comprehend. The Deathworlder fleet was still dominating the skies, their ships circling overhead like vultures waiting to descend on their prey. The ground forces, led by the Deathworlder commanders, were still advancing, but the atmosphere had shifted. It was as if the Deathworlders knew something that Celrins didn't, a quiet, unsettling calm that preceded something far worse. Commander Tellier stood tall, trying to survey the battlefield as best as he could. The Vragans' retreating ships were vanishing into the distance, but a part of him couldn't help but feel a creeping dread. Something felt wrong. The victory they had worked so hard for might not be the end of their struggle. Without warning, the ground shook beneath his feet. Tellier stumbled, almost losing his footing, as an enormous roar echoed across the field. It came from the sky. He looked up, eyes widening in disbelief. A new fleet of Reagan ships appeared on the horizon, larger and more powerful than the ones they had fought before. These ships were equipped with weapons of unimaginable power, their dark silhouettes cutting through the sky like shadows of death. "What is that?" Talier breathed, his voice filled with awe and horror. The Deathworlders, too, paused, their eyes narrowing as they assessed the new threat. They had been confident in their victory, but now they faced an enemy far more dangerous than the first wave. The new Vregan fleet unleashed a barrage of fire, raining down on the Deathworlders with terrifying precision. The Deathworlder ships moved to intercept, their shields absorbing most of the blasts, but the power behind the Vregan weapons was formidable. "This isn't over," said the Deathworlder commander, his voice low and grim. Not by a long shot. The Deathworlders had never expected this, an enemy so relentless, so unyielding, that even their overwhelming might not be enough. But they were not ones to retreat, not ones to give up. "We fight," the Deathworlder commander continued, his tone unwavering. "We end this." And so the battle raged on. The tide had shifted once more, and the Accelerant soldiers, along with their Deathworlder allies, prepared to face the most challenging fight of their lives. Talier, heart pounding in his chest, gripped his weapon tightly. He didn't know how this would end, but one thing was clear: the fight for survival had only just begun. The final stand. The battlefield was a scene of utter chaos, a terrifying spectacle of smoke, fire, and destruction. Talier had never imagined that things would escalate so quickly. The Vregan fleet, now reinforced with their new weapons and advanced ships, had taken the battlefield to a whole new level. Their firepower was overwhelming, and the Deathworlders, though fierce and skilled, were being pushed to their limits. The Deathworlder fleet was still holding its ground, but Talier could see that their strength was starting to wane. Their ships were battered, some of them listing to the side, others leaving behind trails of smoke as they were hit by the Vregan barrage. The Accelerant soldiers fought valiantly, their energy weapons blazing through the smoke, but they were losing ground. The new Vregan ships had overwhelming firepower, and their sheer numbers made it difficult for even the Deathworlders to keep up. "Commander, we can't hold them off for much longer," one of the Deathworlder officers said, her voice tense. "The Vregans are relentless." Talier's gaze was fixed on the horizon, where the Vregan fleet was advancing, almost as if it was a storm cloud descending upon them. It seemed like the battle would never end, with no sign of victory on the horizon. Desperation filled the air, but even in the face of such overwhelming odds, the Deathworlders refused to falter. Talier looked around, seeing the determination in the eyes of the Accelerant soldiers, the Deathworlders, and the civilians who had been caught in the crossfire. They were all fighting for survival, for a future, and for hope. Suddenly, a burst of energy illuminated the battlefield. It was one of the Deathworlder ships, its cannons opening fire on the advancing Vregan fleet. The shot was so powerful it seemed to tear through the very fabric of space itself, and it struck one of the Vregan ships dead center, sending it spiraling out of control. The Vregans didn't give up, though. They retaliated with even more fire, and another Deathworlder ship was destroyed in a fiery explosion. The ground shook as the war raged on, but Talier could see something in the eyes of his fellow soldiers. It was a quiet resolve, a refusal to give in, even in the face of this nightmare. "We won't back down," Talier whispered to himself, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding him. "We will fight until the end." As the Vregan fleet continued to push forward, something unexpected happened. A ripple in the fabric of space, something that had never been seen before, opened in the sky. It was as if the very stars were torn apart, and from the tear came more Deathworlder ships, dozens of them, appearing out of nowhere, and quickly joining the fight. Talier's heart leaped in his chest as the new ships opened fire, cutting through the Vregan fleet with brutal efficiency. It was as if the tide of battle had finally turned in their favor. The Deathworlder reinforcements, stronger and faster than ever before, tore into the Vregan's defenses, devastating their fleet in a matter of minutes. "They've arrived," one of the Tselran officers breathed, his eyes wide with disbelief. The new ships, far more advanced than the ones already in the field, unleashed a barrage of fire that tore through the Vragan ships like paper. Their shields barely held, and the once imposing Vragan fleet began to retreat. The Deathworlders had overwhelmed them. But even as the Vragans began to fall back, Talier could see that the fight was far from over. The Deathworlders might have turned the tide, but the galaxy was still in chaos. The Vragans would regroup, and they would return. The war was far from finished. However, for the moment, the Deathworlders had delivered a decisive blow. The retreating Vragan ships were crippled, and the remaining forces scattered, their morale shattered. Talier stood among the wreckage, his heart still racing from the adrenaline of the battle. He glanced at the sky, the debris of the battle still hanging in the air like a dark cloud. The Deathworlders had proven their strength, and for now, they had saved the galaxy. But Talier knew this victory was temporary. The war was far from over, and the galaxy still faced grave threats. The Deathworlders' arrival had shifted the balance of power, but there were many more battles to be fought. "We've won this one," Talier said softly, his voice steady. "But we must be ready for whatever comes next." The Deathworlders had brought salvation, but their presence also marked the beginning of a new chapter in the war, a chapter that would test every soldier, every civilization, and every warrior who stood for survival. And as Talier looked out over the battlefield, he knew that the galaxy would never be the same again. The aftermath of the battle. The battlefield was a silent graveyard, the echoes of battle now replaced by a heavy, uneasy quiet. The once vibrant stars were now cloaked in the dark smoke of burning ships and shattered debris. Where mighty Vragan ships once loomed, only the remains of their wreckage floated in the void, pieces of twisted metal scattered in every direction. Talier stood at the edge of the command center, his eyes scanning the wreckage. He could still feel the tremors in his bones from the battle, the thrum of explosions reverberating in his chest. The Deathworlder fleet had delivered a devastating blow, but Talier knew better than to believe this was over. He had seen this before, victories that only postponed the inevitable. "Commander," a voice called out behind him, breaking his thoughts. It was one of the officers, her face smudged with soot and her uniform torn. "The Vragans. They've retreated, but not without leaving something behind." Talier turned, raising an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, glancing toward the horizon, where the remnants of the Vragan fleet drifted. The retreat was too calculated. It's like they're regrouping, preparing for something worse. Talier's heart skipped a beat. He had suspected as much. The Vragans were not the type to give up so easily. There had to be more to this, and the uneasy quiet surrounding them was a reminder that danger was always just around the corner. "We need to stay alert," Talier said firmly, his voice unwavering despite the doubt creeping in. "The Vragans will return, and when they do, we must be ready." As the officers and soldiers gathered around him, Talier's thoughts drifted back to the Deathworlder fleet. They had come when the galaxy needed them most, but even their immense power could not protect them from every threat. The Deathworlders were strong, yes, but the galaxy was vast, and countless dangers lurked beyond their reach. "Sir, what do we do next?" another officer asked, his voice filled with uncertainty. Talier looked up, his gaze hardening. "We prepare, we rebuild, and we wait. The galaxy's fate is not decided by one battle." As if on cue, the command center's lights flickered, and a new message appeared on the screen. The transmission was from an unknown source, its origin deep in the heart of Vragan-controlled space. Talier's pulse quickened as he read the message. The Deathworlders are not the only threat. A chill ran down his spine as the words sank in. What did it mean? Who else was out there? Were there more enemies lurking, waiting to strike when the Deathworlders were at their weakest? Talier clenched his fists, his thoughts racing. The galaxy was full of dangers, each more terrifying than the last. The Vragans were only one piece of the puzzle, and now the pieces were falling into place, pieces that could doom them all if they were not careful. "We need to find out who sent this message," Talier ordered, his voice sharp. "If they know something we don't, we need to be prepared." The officers scrambled to follow his orders, their faces tense with worry. Talier knew that this was only the beginning. The Deathworlders had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Outside the command center, the stars burned brightly, but for Talier, the galaxy had never seemed darker. There were too many questions, too many unknowns, and as he looked out into the vast expanse of space, he realized that their fight was just beginning. The Vragans were only one threat, and now they had to face whatever came next. It was no longer just about fighting for survival. It was about ensuring the future of the galaxy itself. "We will find out what's out there," Talier whispered to himself, a new determination in his voice. "And we will be ready." The unknowns of the universe were vast, and the Deathworlders had only just begun their journey into its darkest corners. Whatever lay ahead, Talier knew one thing for certain: it would take everything they had to face it. The calm before the storm. The galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The Deathworlder fleet, victorious yet weary, drifted in the silent expanse of space. The battlefield was behind them, but the uncertainty of the future loomed large. Talier stood at the command center once again, staring at the empty void that stretched endlessly before him. He knew that they had won the battle, but at what cost? And what did the cryptic message from the unknown source mean? The officers and soldiers under his command worked tirelessly, trying to rebuild, repair the damaged chips, and re-establish order. But there was an underlying tension, an unspoken fear that hung in the air. They knew the true enemy had not been defeated. There was something else, something more dangerous, waiting in the shadows. Talier's mind raced as he walked the halls of the fleet's flagship, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. He could feel it in his bones, the calm before the storm. It was as if the galaxy itself was waiting, watching for the next move. "Commander Talier," came a voice from behind him, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Captain Jarek, one of his most trusted officers. "We've received a transmission. It's from the Deathworlders Council. It's urgent." Talier turned to face him, his expression hardening. "Put it through." Within moments, the familiar faces of the Deathworlder Council appeared on the large screen before him. Their expressions were grim, their eyes filled with concern. Talier, one of them, a tall and imposing figure named Admiral Vork, spoke first. "We've been monitoring the situation closely. What happened on the battlefield? It's only the beginning. The galaxy is shifting, and we need to be prepared for what comes next." Talier nodded. "We're all aware of that, Admiral. But the Vragans have retreated. We've won for now." "For now," Vork repeated, his voice laced with caution. "But there are other factions out there. The Vragans were only the first. Something much darker is on the horizon. The message you received, Commander, it's a warning. The enemy we face isn't just another invading force. It's something far worse." Talier felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "What do you mean, Admiral?" Vork's gaze hardened. "I can't go into the details just yet, but we've discovered the existence of an ancient galactic power, something older than even the Deathworlders. They've been watching us, waiting. And now, it seems, they've decided it's time to act." The words hit Talier like a punch to the gut. An ancient power, older than the Deathworlders themselves. What kind of threat could that be? "Do we know where they are?" Talier asked, his voice steady despite the rising storm inside him. Admiral Vork shook his head. "Not yet, but we're gathering intel. We need to act fast. We can't afford to wait for them to strike first." Talier's thoughts raced. He had led the Deathworlders through countless battles. But this was something else entirely. An ancient power, lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to emerge. It was a threat unlike anything he had ever faced before. "We'll prepare," Talier said, his voice firm. "We'll do what we've always done, fight and win. But we need to know more. We need to find them before they find us." Admiral Vork nodded. "That's why we're calling in all available fleets. The Deathworlders must unite, or this galaxy will fall. We'll be sending reinforcements to your location soon." Talier didn't hesitate. "Understood, Admiral. We'll be ready." As the transmission ended, Talier stood still for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The Deathworlders had always been feared, revered, and respected. They had come to the aid of the galaxy in its darkest hour. But now, they faced something far more dangerous. The unknown enemy was not just another conqueror. It was an ancient power, hidden in the dark corners of the galaxy, biding its time. Talier walked back to the command center, his mind in turmoil. The calm had ended. The storm was coming, and it was bigger than any they had faced before. Outside, the stars seemed to shimmer with an eerie glow, as if they too knew what was coming. The future of the galaxy now rested in their hands. "We will face this together," Talier whispered to himself, his voice steady with resolve. "And we will not fall." The calm before the storm. The galaxy seemed to hold its breath. The Deathworlder fleet, victorious yet weary, drifted in the silent expanse of space. The battlefield was behind them, but the uncertainty of the future loomed large. Talier stood at the command center once again, staring at the empty void that stretched endlessly before him. He knew that they had won the battle, but at what cost? And what did the cryptic message from the unknown source mean? The officers and soldiers under his command worked tirelessly, trying to rebuild, repair the damaged ships, and re-establish order. But there was an underlying tension, an unspoken fear that hung in the air. They knew the true enemy had not been defeated. There was something else, something more dangerous, waiting in the shadows. Talier's mind raced as he walked the halls of the fleet's flagship, his footsteps echoing in the stillness. He could feel it in his bones, the calm before the storm. It was as if the galaxy itself was waiting, watching for the next move. "Commander Talier," came a voice from behind him, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Captain Jarek, one of his most trusted officers. "We've received a transmission. It's from the Deathworlders Council. It's urgent." Talier turned to face him, his expression hardening. "Put it through." Within moments, the familiar faces of the Deathworlder Council appeared on the large screen before him. Their expressions were grim, their eyes filled with concern. Talier, one of them, a tall and imposing figure named Admiral Vork, spoke first. "We've been monitoring the situation closely. What happened on the battlefield? It's only the beginning. The galaxy is shifting, and we need to be prepared for what comes next." Talier nodded. "We're all aware of that, Admiral. But the Vragans have retreated. We've won for now." "For now," Vork repeated, his voice laced with caution. "But there are other factions out there. The Vragans were only the first. Something much darker is on the horizon. The message you received, Commander, it's a warning. The enemy we face isn't just another invading force. It's something far worse." Talier felt a cold shiver run down his spine. "What do you mean, Admiral?" Vork's gaze hardened. "I can't go into the details just yet, but we've discovered the existence of an ancient galactic power, something older than even the Deathworlders. They've been watching us, waiting, and now, it seems, they've decided it's time to act." The words hit Talier like a punch to the gut. An ancient power, older than the Deathworlders themselves. What kind of threat could that be? "Do we know where they are?" Talier asked, his voice steady despite the rising storm inside him. Admiral Vork shook his head. "Not yet, but we're gathering intel. We need to act fast. We can't afford to wait for them to strike first." Talier's thoughts raced. He had led the Deathworlders through countless battles, but this was something else entirely. An ancient power, lurking in the shadows, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to emerge. It was a threat unlike anything he had ever faced before. "We'll prepare," Talier said, his voice firm. "We'll do what we've always done, fight and win. But we need to know more. We need to find them before they find us." Admiral Vork nodded. "That's why we're calling in all available fleets. The Deathworlders must unite, or this galaxy will fall. We'll be sending reinforcements to your location soon." Talier didn't hesitate. "Understood, Admiral. We'll be ready." As the transmission ended, Talier stood still for a moment, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The Deathworlders had always been feared, revered, and respected. They had come to the aid of the galaxy in its darkest hour. But now, they faced something far more dangerous. The unknown enemy was not just another conqueror. It was an ancient power, hidden in the dark corners of the galaxy, biding its time. Talier walked back to the command center, his mind in turmoil. The calm had ended. The storm was coming, and it was bigger than any they had faced before. Outside, the stars seemed to shimmer with an eerie glow, as if they, too, knew what was coming. The future of the galaxy now rested in their hands. "We will face this together," Talier whispered to himself, his voice steady with resolve. "And we will not fall."